Chris, step away from the shipping station and keep your hands where I can see them.
These are legitimate medical shipments.
We're investigating Medicare Braze orders tied to your company.
Once is a mistake. Twice is suspicious. Christian Cruz did this hundreds of times across years of carefully structured cash withdrawals and left a paper trail for every single one.
Licensed provider signed every order.
Leave the paperwork exactly where it is.
All right.
He would get a lawyer. He would get a trial. He would get 6 full days in a federal courtroom in Fort Lauderdale to explain why $11.4 million in Medicare claims had flowed through a company he ran out of a one-room office in a Pompano Beach strip mall. The jury would need less than 4 hours to decide. Christian Cruz, 45 years old, a former nursing assistant who once helped elderly patients in and out of bed for $11.75 an hour, would be convicted on every count that mattered: healthcare fraud conspiracy, healthcare fraud, structuring. The sentence would be 9 years. The restitution order would total $3,712,000, and every dollar of it would trace back to seniors who never asked for the braces showing up at their doors. Real talk. Have you ever opened your mailbox and found a piece of medical equipment you never ordered? Or has it happened to your mom, your dad, your grandparent? Drop a comment and tell me about it. And if you're not subscribed yet, now's the time. We cover Medicare fraud cases every single week, and the next one is already loaded up for you. Christian Aníbal Cruz was born in Hialeah, Florida, in February 1980. His parents had arrived from Cuba in the late 1970s. His father worked as a refrigeration mechanic for a commercial seafood company off the Miami River. His mother worked as a housekeeper at one of the smaller hotels off Collins Avenue, 16 rooms a day, 6 days a week, for $9 an hour. The family rented a 2-bedroom unit on West 49th Street in a building where every door opened onto the same concrete walkway and every kitchen smelled like the kitchen next door. Christian was the middle of 3 children. He shared a room with his older brother until he was 14. He went to Hialeah High School. The 1998 yearbook lists him as a member of the wrestling team and the Spanish Honor Society. Teachers remembered him as quiet, but not shy. A guidance counselor wrote on a transcript review that he was, in her words, respectful, attentive, and clearly intelligent, but uncertain about post-secondary direction. He graduated with a 2.8 grade point average and no scholarship offers. His older brother had already joined the Navy. His younger sister was in 8th grade and aimed at nursing school. Christian had no direction at all. He spent the next 3 years bouncing between jobs. He worked the front counter at a Polo Tropical on West 49th. He delivered for a small Cuban bakery in Hialeah Gardens. He drove a forklift at a refrigerated warehouse near Miami International Airport. None of it paid more than $10 an hour, and none of it offered health insurance. In the summer of 2003, at 23, he enrolled in a 6-month certified nursing assistant program at a vocational school in Miami Lakes. The tuition was $2,400. He paid for it in installments out of every paycheck. He passed the state competency exam on his first attempt. His Florida CNA license was issued in March 2004. The first job he took with that credential was at a long-term care facility in Sunrise called Palm Garden Rehabilitation. He worked 12-hour overnight shifts on the dementia wing. He bathed patients who could not bathe themselves. He turned bedridden residents every 2 hours to prevent pressure ulcers. He emptied bedpans. He fed people who could no longer feed themselves. The hourly wage in 2004 was $11.75. He worked 4 nights a week for the first 3 years, which came to roughly $24,000 annually before taxes. His co-workers from those years described him in remarkably consistent terms. One charge nurse, interviewed years later by federal investigators, called him patient and good with the families. A staff supervisor at Palm Garden wrote in his first annual review that he was, quote, exceptionally kind with confused residents, and that the night shift runs more smoothly when Chris is on it. He took an advanced wound care certification in 2007. He completed a phlebotomy course in 2009. By 2011, he was earning $15 an hour and supervising 2 other CNAs on the overnight shift. He married Yesenia Delgado in October 2008. They had met at a cousin's wedding in Doral the year before. She worked as a dental hygienist in Coral Springs. They bought a small townhouse off Atlantic Boulevard in Pompano Beach in 2010 with an FHA loan, $22,000 down on a $310,000 property. Their daughter Isabella was born in March 2012. Their son Mateo was born in July 2014. By the time Mateo arrived, Christian Cruz had been a working CNA for a full decade. He was 34 years old. He was earning $16.80 an hour, with no realistic ceiling above $20. The mortgage was $1,800 a month. Daycare for 2 children in Broward County ran nearly $2,000 a month on top of that. Yesenia's hygienist salary kept the family afloat, but barely. They had $31,000 in credit card debt across 4 cards and not a single dollar in retirement savings. He had been a good CNA for 10 years, and a good CNA at 34 looked exactly like a good CNA at 24, except more tired. That was the year he met the man who would eventually be identified in federal court documents only as co-conspirator 1. Medicare's Durable Medical Equipment Program is a multi-billion-dollar river of public money that flows through a network of private suppliers, prescribing physicians and billing intermediaries. The program was built on a simple premise. A doctor decides a patient needs a piece of equipment. The doctor writes an order. A licensed supplier fills that order, ships the equipment, and submits a claim. Medicare pays the supplier directly. The patient never sees the bill. The premise depends entirely on the doctor's order. Without a signed order from a treating physician, no claim can be submitted. With a signed order, the door opens. The supplier sends the brace, files the claim, and collects payment in 14 to 28 days. Medicare's reimbursement rate for an off-the-shelf back brace runs roughly $900. For a knee brace, around $600. For a shoulder orthotic, more than $700. The braces themselves cost the supplier somewhere between $40 and $70 apiece, shipped in bulk from manufacturing facilities in Taiwan and Pakistan. The math is what attracts the fraud. A single signed order, fraudulent or not, can generate $850 of net profit. Multiply that by 100 orders a week, and a small DME company operating out of a Pompano Beach strip mall can clear close to $3 million a year. Medicare requires every DME supplier to enroll formally before billing a single claim. The enrollment application is 42 pages long. It asks for the legal owners of the company, every person holding 5% or more of the equity, every officer, every manager. It requires fingerprinting. It requires the disclosure of any felony conviction in the prior 10 years for any person with managerial control over the company. The reason for that requirement is straightforward. A convicted felon cannot lawfully own or operate a Medicare-enrolled DME company. If a felon is disclosed on the application, Medicare denies enrollment every time. There are no exceptions. The enrollment process also requires the supplier to certify, in writing, that every claim submitted reflects a medically necessary item ordered by a legitimate treating physician for a real patient. That certification is signed under penalty of federal law. Lying on it is healthcare fraud. Submitting the claim that follows is wire fraud. Cashing the check Medicare sends is money laundering. 3 federal crimes stacked into one transaction every time. On paper, the system is airtight. In practice, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services process more than 1 billion DME claims a year. Claims are paid first and audited later, usually much later. The post-payment review window can run 2 to 3 years behind real time. A determined operator can run an entire fraud scheme from beginning to end before the auditors catch up. By the time the audit hits, the money is gone, the company is dissolved, the bank accounts are empty, and the physicians who signed the orders are typically beyond the practical reach of any investigation. That is the system Christian Cruz walked into in late 2014. The man Cruz met that year was named in the federal indictment only as co-conspirator 1. Court records would later identify him as a Miami area businessman with a 2009 federal conviction for wire fraud. 3 years at the federal complex in Coleman, Florida. 2 years of supervised release. He had done his time. He had also been permanently barred from owning or operating any company that billed Medicare. He knew it. He had received the formal exclusion letter from the Office of Inspector General by certified mail in 2012. The proposition he brought to Cruz was simple. He had the money to fund a startup. He had the contacts inside the DME industry. He had the operational experience. Cruz had something the older man no longer had: a clean federal record and a Florida-issued medical credential. Together, with Cruz as the named owner, they could open a DME company that Medicare would approve on the first pass without a second look. In November 2014, Cruz filed articles of incorporation in Tallahassee for a company called Atlantic Orthotic Solutions, LLC. The registered agent was a paralegal in Hollywood, Florida. The principal address was a one-room rented office in a Pompano Beach strip mall on North Federal Highway, 2 doors down from a vape shop. Cruz signed every founding document as sole owner and managing member. Co-conspirator 1 was not mentioned anywhere on the paperwork, not on the articles, not on the operating agreement, not on the bank account application. The Medicare enrollment application went in 3 months later, in February 2015. Cruz checked the box certifying that no person with managerial control of the company had a felony conviction. He listed himself as the only owner. He provided his CNA license number, his clean background check, and his fingerprints. Medicare approved Atlantic Orthotic Solutions, LLC, as a participating durable medical equipment supplier on April 8, 2015. The first claim was filed 11 days later. The mechanism, once it started, was almost mechanical. Co-conspirator 1 supplied the doctor's orders. He had standing relationships with 2 telemedicine platforms based in Georgia and Texas. The platforms paid licensed physicians a flat fee, usually $30 per order, to sign prescriptions for orthotic braces after a brief phone call with a patient. Sometimes the call lasted 30 seconds. Sometimes there was no call at all. The platforms then sold the signed orders to DME suppliers like Atlantic Orthotic at a markup, typically $200 per order. Cruz paid the markup out of company funds. He used the orders to support claims. He billed Medicare for the full reimbursement rate, between $600 and $1,000 per brace. The patients were sourced from lead lists. Some had responded to late-night television advertisements promising free braces covered by Medicare. Some had filled out cards at health fairs and retirement communities. Some had no idea they were on a list at all. Their names, dates of birth, and Medicare beneficiary numbers had been harvested from data brokers, sometimes from leaked lists, sometimes from outright theft. The lists arrived at Cruz's office as spreadsheets attached to encrypted emails. The braces themselves shipped from a third-party fulfillment warehouse in Doral, Florida. Cruz visited the warehouse twice a week to sign off on outgoing shipments. He never met a single one of the patients whose names were printed on the boxes. The boxes went to Iowa. They went to Texas. They went to Pennsylvania, Arizona, Mississippi, Oregon, Maine. They went to 93-year-old widows in assisted living. They went to a dialysis patient in rural Mississippi who had never asked for a back brace and had no use for one. They went to a Methodist minister in suburban Ohio who tried for 3 months to send his unopened box back and who could not find a return address that any human being would acknowledge. The volume grew. In the company's first full year of operation, 2015, Atlantic Orthotic billed Medicare $2.1 million. In 2016, the figure was $4.8 million. In 2017, $3.7 million. By the time the scheme was shut down in 2018, the cumulative billed amount stood at $11.4 million. Medicare paid out roughly 40 cents on the dollar, which was standard for the program. Cruz's personal cut, after the kickbacks paid to co-conspirator 1, the telemedicine fees, the warehouse costs, and the shipping expenses, came to slightly over $700,000. He bought a black Cadillac Escalade. He paid off the FHA mortgage on the Pompano Beach townhouse. He took Yesenia and the children to Walt Disney World twice in 1 year and stayed at the Grand Floridian Resort both times. He told his wife, when she asked, that the new money came from a side business consulting for a medical supply company. She did not press him. She had stopped pressing about most things by the middle of 2016. And every few weeks, Christian Cruz walked into a bank. The first suspicious activity report was filed on August 14, 2017, by a bank compliance officer at a Wells Fargo branch in Lighthouse Point. Her name does not appear in the public record. Her job was to review the prior week's cash transactions for any pattern that triggered federal reporting thresholds. She noticed that the same customer, Christian Cruz, account ending in 4471, had walked into 3 different branches across 2 days and withdrawn $9,400, $9,200, and $9,700 in cash. 3 withdrawals. All under the $10,000 reporting threshold. All within 48 hours. Federal law requires banks to file a currency transaction report on any single cash transaction over $10,000. That same law also requires banks to file a suspicious activity report on any pattern of transactions that appears designed to evade the first requirement. The pattern has a name. It is called structuring. It is a federal felony all by itself, even if the underlying money came from a legal source. The compliance officer flagged the pattern. The SAR was filed electronically with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network in Vienna, Virginia. It sat in a database with millions of others. In May 2018, an FBI financial crimes analyst working out of the Miami field office ran a routine query against the FinCEN database. She was looking for South Florida DME suppliers with unusual cash withdrawal activity, part of a broader strike force initiative on orthotic brace fraud. Christian Cruz's name surfaced with 62 separate structuring pattern SARs filed across 11 different bank branches over a 31-month period. The total cash withdrawn in amounts between $8,500 and $9,900 came to $483,000. She pulled the Medicare enrollment file for Atlantic Orthotic Solutions, LLC. She pulled the billing history. The billing history showed $11 million in claims originating from a one-room office in a Pompano Beach strip mall. The enrollment file showed a single owner, a man with a CNA license and no other professional credentials, no warehouse, no employees on the payroll, no medical director, and no signed agreements with prescribing physicians. She forwarded the file to the Healthcare Fraud Strike Force the following Monday. The investigation that opened in May 2018 would last 22 months. We're heading into the federal investigation now. If you want to see exactly how the Healthcare Fraud Strike Force builds a case like this one, subscribe to the channel. We break down every step, every subpoena, every witness, every piece of evidence. These prosecutions don't get the coverage they deserve, and what comes next is the part Cruz never thought anyone would find. The strike force was a joint task force of FBI agents, Health and Human Services Office of Inspector General Investigators, and Department of Justice trial attorneys. The lead investigator assigned to the Cruz file was a special agent named Holland Reyes. She had spent 6 years in financial crimes before transferring to the healthcare fraud unit 2 years earlier. She knew exactly what she was looking at the moment the file landed on her desk. The first move was the bank records. Reyes obtained federal grand jury subpoenas for every account associated with Atlantic Orthotic Solutions, LLC, and every personal account held in Christian Cruz's name across 4 Florida banks. The records came back over 6 weeks. They showed the Medicare deposits arriving on a predictable schedule, large regular wire transfers from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. They showed outgoing payments to telemedicine platforms in Georgia and Texas, and they showed wire transfers to an account in the name of a Miami Consulting LLC that turned out, after another round of subpoenas, to be controlled entirely by co-conspirator 1. The structuring pattern was laid out on a single spreadsheet. 84 cash withdrawals between January 2016 and December 2017. 81 of them were between $8,500 and $9,900. The remaining 3 were exactly $9,950. Reyes printed the spreadsheet out and pinned it to the corkboard above her desk. The second move was the patients. Investigators identified 147 Medicare beneficiaries whose names appeared on Atlantic orthotic claims during the relevant period, drawn from a stratified sample across the country. They began calling them in June 2018. The interviews ran through January 2019. Of the 147 people contacted, 141 said they had never ordered the brace. 73 said they had never even spoken to any doctor about one. 41 said they had received the brace, tried to return it, and given up when the return process led to disconnected phone numbers and unread emails. The remaining 32 had thrown the brace in a closet and forgotten about it. The third move was the telemedicine records. The Georgia platform, served with a federal subpoena in late 2018, produced internal communications showing that the licensed physicians on its roster were being paid $30 per order to sign prescriptions for patients they had spoken to for an average of 41 seconds. One physician, operating from a home office in suburban Atlanta, had signed 310 orders in a single 8-hour shift. He had spent the equivalent of 93 seconds on each one. The fourth move was co-conspirator 1. Investigators traced the wire transfers from Atlantic Orthotics' operating account through 3-layered shell LLCs to a residential address in Aventura. They placed the property under physical surveillance for 19 days. They photographed the convicted felon arriving and leaving. They pulled his federal tax returns. He had reported no earned income for the years 2015 through 2018. Over that same 4-year window, the wire transfers from Cruz's company into his shell accounts totaled $1,800,000. The smoking gun, when it came, was Cruz's own handwriting. Agents executed a federal search warrant at the Pompano Beach Strip Mall office on the morning of February 11, 2020. In a locked drawer in the metal desk Cruz used, they recovered a black leather-bound ledger. Inside, in Cruz's handwriting, were 2 columns of entries running across 43 pages. The left column listed dates. The right column listed dollar amounts. Every single entry in the right column was between $8,500 and $9,900. The dates matched the cash withdrawals on the bank records exactly. At the top of the first page, in block capital letters, were 3 words underlined twice: keep under 10K. The arrest came on the morning of March 11, 2020, at the townhouse off Atlantic Boulevard in Pompano Beach. 6 federal agents in raid jackets knocked on the front door at 6:45. Yesenia answered in a bathrobe with her phone still in her hand. Isabella, 8 years old, was sitting at the kitchen table eating cereal in her school uniform. Mateo, 6, was still asleep upstairs. Christian Cruz was in the master bathroom shaving. He came down the stairs in a white t-shirt and gray sweatpants. He had shaving cream still drying on the underside of his jaw. Special Agent Reyes stood at the front of the line. 2 more agents were behind her, badges out. A 4th was already moving past her into the living room. Christian Cruz, we have a federal warrant for your arrest. The charges are healthcare fraud, conspiracy, and structuring. Please put your hands behind your back. Wait. Hold on a second. What is this? The warrant is right here, sir. You can read it after we're outside. Hands behind your back. I run a legitimate business. I have a CNA license. I have an LLC in good standing. Every claim I filed has documentation. There has to be a mistake here. Sir, we have your ledger. The room went quiet. Yesenia stopped moving. Isabella, at the kitchen table, lifted her head and looked at her father. Cruz looked at the agent. He looked at the floor. He looked at his wife. He looked back at Agent Reyes. The shaving cream on his jaw was beginning to dry into a thin white crust. I want to call my lawyer. That's your right, sir. Hands behind your back, please. He turned. He let them put the cuffs on. He did not speak again. They walked him out the front door, past the 2 unmarked patrol vehicles in the driveway. The neighbor across the street was watering her hydrangeas. She would tell a reporter, 3 days later, that he kept his head down the entire walk to the car. The federal grand jury in the Southern District of Florida had returned a sealed indictment 2 days earlier, on March 9, 2020. It charged Christian Cruz with 1 count of conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud, 11 counts of substantive healthcare fraud, and 7 counts of structuring transactions to evade federal reporting requirements. Co-conspirator 1 was charged in a separate sealed indictment and arrested the same morning at the Aventura residence by a parallel team. The case ground forward slowly. Pre-trial motions consumed the first 18 months. The defense, led by a Coral Gables criminal attorney named Esteban Quintero, moved to suppress the leather-bound ledger on the grounds that the search warrant had been overbroad. The motion was denied in a written order that ran to 28 pages. Quintero then moved to sever Cruz's trial from his co-defendants. That motion was granted. Co-conspirator 1 pleaded guilty in November 2024 and agreed to testify against Cruz at trial in exchange for a government recommendation of 84 months and a forfeiture of his Aventura home. The trial began on January 6, 2026, in the federal courthouse in Fort Lauderdale. It lasted 6 full court days. The government called 19 witnesses. 3 of them were Medicare beneficiaries who had received braces they did not order. One of them, a 78-year-old retired schoolteacher from Cedar Rapids, Iowa, named Marlene Henderson, took the stand in a wheelchair and testified that she had spent 11 months trying to return the back brace that arrived at her assisted living apartment in October of 2017. She had assumed at first that it was a scam, but the package had her full name on it and her correct Medicare ID, so she had been afraid to throw it out. She had been right to be afraid, and right that it was a scam. Co-conspirator 1 testified for an entire day. He walked the jury through the doctor's orders, the telemedicine platforms, the kickback arrangement, and the cash payments. He identified Cruz from the witness stand by pointing across the courtroom. He read aloud from a series of text messages between the two of them, recovered from his own seized phone. One message, sent by Cruz in March 2017, read, "Pulled 9400 today. Branch off sample ARD. Easy." Another, from August of the same year, read simply, "Need more orders. Send the next batch by Friday." The defense rested without calling a single witness. Cruz did not testify on his own behalf. The jury returned its verdict on the morning of January 14, 2026. Guilty on the conspiracy count. Guilty on all 11 healthcare fraud counts. Guilty on all 7 structuring counts. 19 of 19. Sentencing was set for April 13, 2026. The pre-sentence investigation report calculated a federal guidelines range of 108 to 135 months. The government asked for the high end. Quintero argued for the low end, citing Cruz's prior clean record, his decade of legitimate service as a CNA, and his role as the father of 2 minor children. Judge Aurelia Bensonhurst, a 62-year-old former federal prosecutor appointed to the bench in 2011, listened to both sides without interruption. Then she addressed the defendant directly. "Mr. Cruz, you began your professional career caring for elderly patients in a long-term care facility in Sunrise. You bathed them. You fed them. You held their hands when they were frightened in the middle of the night. The same population you cared for in your 20s became, in your 30s, the source of your personal enrichment. You did not steal from strangers. You stole from people whose Medicare numbers you understood the value of, precisely because you had spent a decade with people exactly like them. The structuring count is what concerns me most. A person who is confused about what he is doing does not write 'keep' under 10K at the top of a ledger. A person who is confused does not pull the same $9,000 amount from 62 separate transactions across 11 different branches. You knew what you were doing. You did it anyway, for $11.4 million. She sentenced him to 108 months, 9 years, 2 years of supervised release to follow, $3,712,345.70 in restitution. $724,871 in criminal forfeiture, payable from the seizure of his bank accounts, the Cadillac Escalade, and the Pompano Beach townhouse. He was designated to the Federal Correctional Institution at Coleman, Florida, medium security. the same complex where co-conspirator 1 had served his earlier sentence 15 years before. The projected release date on the Bureau of Prisons Inmate Locator reads April 2034. By then, his daughter Isabella will be 22 years old. His son Mateo will be 20. The townhouse off Atlantic Boulevard has been sold. Yesenia and the children moved back to Hialeah and are now living 3 blocks from the building on West 49th where Christian Cruz grew up. This case was disturbing, but the case on your right is somehow worse. Bigger numbers, deeper betrayal, more victims. Click it now.